Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and we have another really, really good conversation. And I think you're all going to be very happy to hear this discussion because it's something that you all have asked for. It's something that shows up a lot in my coaching and my leadership training. And you're all wondering what? Well, you'll know more when I give you an introduction to our guests. So today we are going to be talking with Rebecca Hinds, who is a leading expert on organizational behavior and the future of work. Rebecca holds a Bachelor of Science, Master of Science, and PhD from Stanford University, where her research focused on how emerging technologies, especially collaboration tools and AI, are reshaping the way we work. From 2022 to 2025, Rebecca founded and led the Work Innovation Lab at Asana to explore bold, research-driven solutions to the biggest challenges in today's workplace. In 2025, she launched the Work AI Institute of Glean, where she partners with leading experts to help organizations transform their work with AI. Rebecca is a trusted advisor to leading companies, helping teams tackle everything from meeting overload and hybrid work or to the growing pains of AI adoption and organizational change. So here's where I think you're all going to get very excited. Her new book is called Your Best Meeting Ever, and it provides a blueprint to transform your meetings from monotonous, soul-crushing time sinks into powerful tools for collaboration. The secret: treat them like products. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristen. I'm looking forward to this.
So, Rebecca, before we get into the discussion and talk a little bit more, all things meetings and how to be more effective, and maybe we don't even need meetings in some cases, I'd love my audience to get to know you a little bit more and your backstory and what got you to this work that you're doing in the world.
Sure. So, in many ways, I think my career has been shaped by a long early career in swimming. I was a competitive swimmer, and that was a big part of who I was. And over time, more and more, especially as I began to swim at the collegiate level in the US, I became fascinated by the idea of teamwork. And how can you bring together a group of people who all have individual motives and biases and quirks and extract the best out of them such that the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. And I had seen that. I swam for Stanford, which was, an amazing and is an amazing swim program. And they had done that. They had done that and built that in the culture. And as I began to move closer and closer to a career in industry and out of athletics, I became really fascinated by how could you recreate that type of culture and team first culture in an organizational setting in a way that brings out the best of people. And so started to study leadership and organizational design and teamwork and collaboration and coordination. And that's what in so many ways has led to Your Best Meeting Ever. It's led to the work I do in industry. We often don't appreciate just how human work is or ought to be, and how with intentional design we can create environments that not only lead to greater organizational performance but also lead to better environments for employees and humans in general.
Yeah, so you're definitely such a great fit for the show because everybody who knows me for almost 15 years, I've been talking about how we need to humanize the workplace. And in order to, because we have a bunch of humans working within work environments, and why can't we create an environment that creates high performance, but also where humans thrive? Because we can have both, in my belief. So as a starting point, it sounds like the catalyst for writing this book was perhaps that you sometimes saw that there were some impediments or challenges perhaps with how some organizations were doing meetings?
Yes, and broadly, I'm fascinated by collaboration and coordination at work. And that is something that, when we think about just how much time we spend, because we work with humans, spend collaborating with other humans, it's, for most people in knowledge work type settings or desk work type settings, it's 85 to 90% of our time that we spend collaborating. And so as I began helping organizations in particular think about their broken or dysfunctional cross-functional collaboration, meetings in so many ways were the tip of the iceberg. Often they're not the problem, which is a misconception, but usually, you can learn a lot about the overall collaboration and coordination of an organization and where it needs fixing and improvement. You can learn a lot from the meetings. And as you know, we have this visceral negative reaction to meetings where you can go into any room and folks feel socially conditioned to hate meetings and hate meetings in general. And so, wanting to address this, wanting to create more than just a series of half-hearted fixes. Having an agenda is not going to fix all our meeting problems, and put together what I think is a blueprint about fixing dysfunctional meetings, but more than that in terms of why it's important to rethink fundamentally how we collaborate and communicate at work.
Nice, nice. So let's dig into that because I'm really excited to be able to, for myself, learn more, and of course, my audience as well. I'll just share a couple of themes that I hear in some of the pushback when it comes to, um, collaboration not happening perhaps as effectively. We'll start at the meetings, but then we'll get at quite often probably the root cause, which is around why some of this collaboration is not happening as effectively. Some of the things that I hear are that we do the meeting, but then we come out of the meeting and there isn't really specific ROI that came from it. I don't think we needed to have a meeting for that in the first place. I hear we have too many meetings and it feels like, how am I supposed to do my job when 80% of my day feels like it's in meetings? And then if I'm lucky, I have that small little 20% where I can get into some of the actions from said meetings or do some of the things that are in the strategic direction of my current role. So those are a couple of things that jump out at me. So let's start. I'm going to let you guide this, Rebecca, and we get to go wherever you want to go. But, some of those key themes so that some of the leaders that are hearing this will either think, I am someone who is actually leading the meetings and I could be doing this a little bit more effectively. Or I'm an individual who's attending meetings and maybe I could attend a bit differently. Or maybe
Mhm.
I don't even need to attend some of these meetings. So let's start there.
Sure. So the premise of the book is we need to treat our meetings like a product. Meetings are the most important product in our entire organization. There where decisions get made, priorities get set, alignment is set, culture gets built or broken, and yet they're the least optimized. And each of the 7 chapters of the book walks through a product design principle applied to meetings. Because if we are to take this intentional lens through which to design and attend meetings, we should apply what already works in other settings to meetings. And I think that premise around a lot of the dysfunction around meetings is laziness. It's that we use meetings as a lazy substitute for real work and smart thinking. And there are many reasons for that. One big reason is meetings are highly visible, right? They're highly visible in the organization. Often calendars will be public. We know when we try to schedule a meeting with someone and they come back saying they're double booked, they have a packed calendar, that becomes a symbol of busyness, importance, status within the organization, where we're incentivized to schedule meetings as a default, even when we know they're not productive. So most of the time, a lot of these problems can be fixed with clearly articulating what actually deserves to be a meeting. Usually, a lot of the dysfunction is driven by the fact that we use meetings as mechanisms for information exchange, the status updates, the boss briefings, things that don't require this very expensive synchronous back and forth communication. Usually a whole bunch of meeting debt, I call it, can be solved by thinking about within a meeting, can that meeting be moved asynchronous, or are there certain components of meetings that can be moved asynchronous? And usually within every meeting, there's a portion that probably can move asynchronously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense, I think. So then when we start to think about a meeting's happening, It is a valuable meeting. However, it's a meeting that does need to happen in meeting format because maybe there's something that needs to be talked through, and we don't want to be back and forth constantly with emails. And yet, sometimes it feels like, okay, let's start with at the beginning of the first part of the meeting is people feel very disengaged and not
Mhm.
really connected to happening in the meeting, not really connected to what's happening in the meeting. So let's start there. How can we make meetings more engaging for all involved?
And it's a multi-dimensional approach. It should be in the best of cases. First and foremost, and there's when we think about product design principles applied to meetings, there's a chapter in the book on engagement and how important it is to apply user-centric design to our meetings, just as we would never build a product for customers without considering the customer. The same should be true with meetings. And so often, and the research by my great colleague Stephen Rogelberg shows that there tend to be two people who leave the meeting most satisfied, and that is the organizer, the
Yeah.
person who did get to design it, because often they've designed it for themselves, and the person who spoke the most in the meeting. And
Yes.
so, first, we need to consider who are the attendees in the room? What is going to make this valuable for them? And if it's not valuable for them, either the meeting shouldn't exist or you've gotten the wrong attendee makeup in the room. Often I find that we overschedule, we have a fear of missing out in organizations for a whole bunch of different reasons. And the people in the room might all be related and tangentially related to what's being discussed or decided, but they're not a key stakeholder. And that's another example where if the goal is just to keep them in the loop and informed on what's happened in the meeting, that should be happening asynchronously. In the book, I walk through a test that's called the 4D CEO test to determine whether a meeting actually needs to exist. The first part of the test is you shouldn't schedule a meeting unless the purpose is to decide, debate, discuss, or develop yourself or your team.
Mm,
And even if that's the case, the content should still pass this second CEO test, which
mm.
is the content should be complex. There should be enough ambiguity, unknown unknowns, where it is going to be more efficient to get together synchronously in a meeting, iterate, build off of each other. Or it should be emotionally intense, right? You should be needing to manage emotions, read emotions. You're trying to negotiate or persuade someone, deliver hard feedback. Or coming from Amazon, it should be a one-way door decision, meaning once you walk through, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to revert course and go back the other way because the cost of misalignment is too high not to get in a 15-minute meeting and ensure that everyone's aligned. So lots of things don't pass the 4D CEO test, and lots of things that we traditionally would default to using meetings for, status updates, boss briefings, even brainstorm meetings. All of these things don't pass the test and should be primarily used as part of asynchronous channels.
I love that. And I think it's really important for everybody listening. Can you slow it down a little bit and go in a bit more detail with that list of the four things that they should really, like, if these four things are not there, it should not be a meeting. And I want them to really hear what those four things are and maybe give it a little bit more detail.
Sure. So it's a two-part test. So the first test, which I find will remove a lot of the dysfunction in terms of meetings or components of meetings that don't need to exist. A meeting should only exist if the purpose is to decide something, discuss something, debate something, or develop. Develop yourself, your team building, career development. Often that's a piece that we under invest in, as you know, Kristen, in organizations. As we try to make our meetings more efficient and effective, we can't afford to cut that piece. And that's why it was really important in particular for me to include that development as part of the 4Ds. Where it sometimes gets blurry is this discuss category,
Hmm.
because not every meeting is warranted, if something is needing to be discussed. And
Mhm.
that's in large part why the CEO, the second part of the test comes in, and in particular, this dimension around complexity. So even if something passes the 4D test, you're debating something, discussing something, it needs to pass either a C, E, or O. So it needs to be complex enough. There needs to be ambiguity, unknown unknowns, where perhaps you could do it asynchronously, but given the complexity, given the interdependencies, getting in the room in a meeting, so long as you share the context ahead of time asynchronously, is probably going to be most efficient. E, this is all about managing emotions, reading emotions. We know that's an extremely important purpose of face to face, human to human connection. We need to read body language, we need to exhibit empathy and trust. That's going to be more effectively done in a meeting, even if it could, again, be done asynchronously. And then one-way door decisions. So are you debating, discussing, deciding something for which it's very difficult to revert course and go back? So it's you're deciding on a new product line for your company, or you're deciding on a sweeping change that will impact all your employees. Getting together, ensure that, I've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it, Kristen, as well, where someone will say something in the meeting that you hadn't considered, and given the high stakes of the decision, the debate, that's too important to risk not getting into a room and making sure everyone's aligned. The vast majority of decisions that we make in our organizations are two-way doors, meaning we walk through, it's quite easy to revert course. It's not a super high stakes decision for which it's difficult to revert course.
That's great. Thank you for really slowing it down, Rebecca, because I think that's really, really, really helpful content. And again, I suggest we're going to talk more about the book and have that available to you. That's going to allow you to go more in depth and be able to highlight it and go back and use that as a reference when you're thinking about some of these things. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on? I see with a lot of organizations, and thank you for also accentuating the one-on-one and talking about career development. And really, I think it's so powerful when it comes to that one-on-one coaching and mentoring, and it doesn't get enough airtime, or it's one of the things to go off of the calendar because people feel like I'm too busy, I can't do that. And I try to help all of my leaders understand. Um, when you do things proactively like this and build this relationship and continue to coach and mentor and make sure, where that person might be struggling and growing, where it might, the payoff around spending that time is amplified huge when you're doing that. And yet it can feel counterintuitive. Because it
Mm-hmm.
can feel like, but I don't have time. I have all of these things, and everyone's like, yeah, but you just also might hear about things that you don't realize. It's building trust. It's doing all of these other things that later on, where they might need you, might need that support. That relationship has really been built, and lots of trust and safety and all of that kind of stuff that can also prevent things happening down the line.
It's really important, and I've never seen it be more important than now. Certainly in my career, we're seeing this narrative, as you know, around AI productivity. We need to do more with less. We need to cut all the fat. We're in the world of efficiency, the era of efficiency. And there's a very strong narrative. And in many ways, it's been driven by Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, who I think is a phenomenal leader. But he has 50 or 60 reports, and he's said very publicly that he doesn't hold one-on-one meetings with them.
Right.
And this has triggered this narrative around, do we really need one-on-ones with our direct reports? The research is overwhelming that there is nothing that a manager can do that's more impactful for the direct report than having that consistent check-in with the direct report. Now, it should be driven by the direct report. They should be, in most cases, setting the agenda and driving the conversation. But there's nothing you can do that's more important, especially right now. Everyone is worried about what their career looks like in a new AI era, there's always something critical to discuss that can help that employee, if not in the day to day this week, certainly in their career in a way that we can't afford to cut those. And if we're too busy, then something bigger needs to change in terms of the span of our controls. We're also seeing, a flattening is the fad of the moment right now that's giving way to these ballooning spans of control in a way that managers are overwhelmed. They don't have enough time to give reports their support and guidance and mentorship and inspiration. And usually this is a function of a bigger problem than you don't have time for meetings.
Absolutely. That's all from my experience. That's always been the case. And there's so much stats to support when a lot of times when individuals leave organizations, they actually leave the leader, not the organization, because they don't feel like they're getting that support that they're getting. Some of that, and sometimes we also have the dysfunctional behavior that is when they are getting the support. It's not the right kind of support. Um,
Mhm.
what was also making me, I was thinking about as you were talking when it comes to meetings is I do find with some organizations, they just have those meetings that happen that are in the calendar that are weekly. It might be the team meeting, the group meeting, all that kind of stuff. And when I talk to some of the individuals in their meetings, they're like, okay, it just happens because it's a thing that happens every week, but we're not really getting a lot out of it. And I think the leader would sometimes say, well, it's team building. It's our way to make sure that we're staying together as a team. I'm like, yeah, but when you talk to me about what you're doing in the meeting, there's nothing about that that feels team building. So I'm sure there are a lot of people on this that are listening that have this kind of situation. Because maybe you might say, well, I don't think we need to be completely taking those meetings off. There is something about the consistency that's happening with the team meeting like that, but it maybe needs to be structured a little bit differently. What are your thoughts there, Rebecca?
You're exactly right. And I think there are, again, several dimensions of this. One, I often find team meetings, especially once you get above 7 or 8 people in a meeting, a whole host of negative impacts start to kick in. Social loafing, people feel less accountable, multitasking starts to spike. And so, especially with these department wide weekly meetings or even monthly meetings, figuring out what is the purpose of those meetings. And again, if it's information exchange, that should happen asynchronously. If it's team building, sharing updates, sharing strictly work isn't going to optimize for that outcome. It would be much more effective to, cancel 2 weekly meetings and hold a, in-person lunch if you're able to, something where people are going to bond over non-work topics because we
Yeah.
know that's very important for relationship building in organizations. Sometimes it's called multiplex relationships, where once you have a relationship with someone beyond just the work, you're more likely to trust them, you're more likely to depend on them in a way that helps the work in the long run. It's all about intentionality, the purpose. What is the purpose of this checkpoint? And recognizing that just because you've scheduled a weekly meeting doesn't mean it needs to happen weekly. And I often work with organizations to, try to cut it in half. My colleague Bob Sutton will call this the rule of halves. Try
Yeah.
to take that weekly meeting and cut it to half the frequency so that you're meeting every other week. Usually what people will see is they didn't need that weekly check-in, and there are other more effective ways to think about communication in the interim than scheduling another meeting. Another good tell is if you're recycling the agenda week after week, it's probably something where you've fallen into inertia and aren't intentionally, deliberately thinking about, okay, what actually needs to be a meeting this week. If it's the same as last week, that's usually a red flag.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think I like what you said there too around because I do think there's lots of value of bringing the team together, but it'd be 1,000% more effective if it was having a lunch together and doing more of the getting to know each other human to human, which
Mhm.
does lead to when there are more stressful situations, they can see more the humanity and they relate to that person differently and there's more trust built. I'm also wondering in some of these cases where you've said, you know what, some of these don't need to be meetings and they could be meeting. I have such a hard time with the word async. Can you say that word again? A
Sometimes I just shorten it to async.
Yeah, let's just say async because for whatever reason, my brain is having a hard time with that word. So I'm not going to force myself to try to do it. But so when that's happening, um, I think even with that, we need to have some systems in place so that it's being done effectively. So what are your thoughts around doing that when they are going to be having some of those discussions?
100%. And we saw this during the pandemic in particular, where the response to the lack of FaceTime and physical connection was to invest in all these digital tools, Slack, Figma, Canva, Asana. And we had all these tools that could have allowed us to spend less time in meetings. We saw the reverse happen. And we saw, in particular, across every level within the organization, the time we spend in dysfunctional meetings has increased quite significantly from 2019 to 2024. Now, why is that? Well, it's because we had more digital tools. We had more ways of asynchronously connecting beyond just email. And yet we didn't have clarity in terms of which technologies to use for which purposes and what are the norms around that. A simple test is ask your employees, what is the purpose of Slack within our organization? What is the purpose of a meeting? What is the purpose of email? You shouldn't be getting multiple different answers to that very fundamental question. It's such a simple step to take as an organization to outline that, document that. It can be on your wiki, it can be, in another virtual channel. Remote first companies tend to do this significantly more effectively than in office cultures because they need to. They have no choice but to establish well-oiled communication channels beyond meetings. Yet in hybrid, in predominantly in office environments, we somehow have overlooked the importance of giving employees that clarity in a way that, yes, these tools might exist, but they're always going to default back to meetings and perhaps have more meetings because they're not sure where the real work is living. They're doing information scavenger hunts throughout their day, and scheduling a meeting starts to feel like the only reliable way to get information from other people.
I think that makes so much sense. And I remember during the pandemic too, we'd have a lot of conversations around that too, in terms of what are those communication channels, making it clear how each should be used and how it should and shouldn't be used, and then making sure that everyone understands that. And I think that's exactly what is happening is because people don't know, and then everyone has different ideas of what that is. So then they just default to, well, then we need to have a meeting because and it makes sense for organizations to take some of the playbook from organizations that are more remote work because, like you said, they've had to create more of those systems and foundations in order to be able to be working effectively. So thank you for breaking that down more. I think that will be really helpful for people listening. I'm also
And
wondering, oh
I'll
yeah.
say too, because I think it's important. It's also, not just about the tools, as we've sort of alluded to, just because you have these tools and you've written down the purpose and the norms around them. One of the key characteristics of organizations that have healthy meeting cultures is not only they have healthy asynchronous communication cultures, but relatedly, they have very strong written communication cultures and they have very high transparency organizations, such that it's the norm to share in public channels whenever you
Mhm.
can, whenever there's not a privacy type risk or a risk of oversharing, because those two things, strong written communication cultures, high context communication as well, explicitly saying, I need this by this date, this is why I need this is what I'm expecting for you. All of that enables people to self-serve the information and not default to meetings to again collect the information.
Thank you. It's almost like you read my mind because that's where I was going to take you next. Like when we start to think about some of the organizations and when it comes to meeting, and let's expand this into meeting and collaboration culture. What do
Mhm.
you see? Like if we take more a big take a step back and look at from a bigger view, what do you find that they're doing really effectively to get to that place? Because I think a lot of people listening want to, but they
Mhm.
are maybe asking a little bit more direction. Like where should we start? Like if we're really taking a step back and asking ourselves, how can we have a more effective meeting culture and collaboration culture in service of, again, because this serves everyone because the meetings are now more effective and people
Mhm.
are not feeling like they're running around to all these things that aren't necessarily optimized. What were some of those steps, actions, insights you would share with some people who organizations that are doing it really well?
Sure. And this is my passion area for sure, helping organizations around collaboration in general. So if we take that lens, a bit of a broader lens than meetings, what's fascinating and I think underappreciated is how reliably we can predict individual performance, team performance, and organizational performance by how people are collaborating. And so this can be done in various ways. There are some much more effective ways than others. Ideally, you have a good understanding of how your employees are collaborating, especially through virtual channels. And you're able to map out, okay, where is collaboration working versus not? Where are the employees in the Tokyo office not connected to the rest of the organization? Often we see, as soon as you go outside headquarters, the silos become even more pervasive. Where are managers not talking to direct reports? Where are senior leaders completely, removed from the communication network? Where is marketing completely siloed from sales or engineering? We know that that's really important. And mapping that out, you can use a lot of the analytics from your existing tools to do this. If not, you can ask employees who they collaborate with, where they feel silos exist, and that starts to give you a map in terms of, okay, I've diagnosed the problem, where do I need to fix it? A big misconception is more collaboration is better. And I'm seeing, especially if we think about the Silicon Valley tech companies, often they suffer from too much collaboration rather than too little collaboration. And so thinking also about, okay, what collaboration needs to exist within the organization. The goal isn't for the marketing department to be collaborating every week with every other department. What are the departments that, and we have a lot of research to suggest which department connections matter.
Hmm.
And something like marketing and engineering actually matters a lot. It's one of the biggest drivers of innovation within a company. You can think about Apple as the classic example: great marketing, great engineering.
Yeah.
Now, in our AI first era, the connection between HR and IT, super, super important, and is starting to be a predictor of overall AI adoption and maturity, because you need the deeply human lens that HR often brings and leads, but you also need the deeply technical lens to understand how to build this technology in a way that scales and is secure. And so, again, understanding what are those communication channels looking like right now, and how can I strengthen them given what the business needs in the moment. That's step one in terms of the diagnostic. Lots of ways to go about it, some more effective than others. But collaboration is an activity that is so invisible in our organization. It's very hard to end a workday knowing who you've collaborated with, in which channels, and how effective that has been. And so the more we can use data, the more we can use evidence, feedback from our employees to make that assessment, the more we're going to be able to develop targeted solutions that are effective in the moment. The other big piece of this is the incentives. And the great organizations who do this well, they're either formally or informally incentivizing healthy collaboration. Sometimes they're even building
Mm.
it into performance reviews,
Wow.
but that needs to be explicit, or else we as humans, we're individualistic and we're going to optimize for the individual as opposed to our team and function.
Wow, I really like that with incentivizing because I can think of some organizations who've gotten good around that I've worked with when we think about the values and the behaviors that are associated with the values where they've now incentivized. Because what can
Mhm.
happen previously is people got their bonuses, you hit the ROI, you hit your numbers, but guess what? At what expense? Like what was the collateral damage? So now they're incentivized that we're not just looking at did you hit your goals and hit your numbers? How did you show up when it comes to behaviors? And that feels like something that could easily be baked in because if I think about a lot of my organizations I work with, collaboration is one of the values. So then
Mhm.
they can be also looking at and make it, I like that you also use the word explicit because it needs to be very clear. This is something that we're looking at, we're encouraging, and it's going to, I mean, I believe it ultimately sets everybody up for success because you can actually do your your role more effectively when you're collaborating with others.
And again, this is something that's never been more important either, because we're also seeing a world where people are starting to use AI in a way that is over indexing on the individual. It's how can I use this technology to boost my individual productivity, often at the cost of other people. And we see it in, when we think about meetings, people sending their bots to meetings instead of showing up themselves, or triggering all this AI slop, as it's being called in organizations. It's called the tragedy of the commons, where we know if we incentivize at the individual level, and if that's our goal, boosting individual productivity, it can easily come at the cost of team and organizational performance. You can have more productive individuals and less productive teams and organizations unless you're explicitly incentivizing for collaboration. That's why I'm a big proponent of every organization starting to measure collaboration around AI and healthy norms around how do you bring this new, agent or AI system onto the team in a way that you are a team player and you're not using it disproportionately to benefit yourself as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's something that we have to really be cautious around. And I think that I was thinking as you were talking, I definitely see the connection around marketing and engineer. And thanks for giving the example of Apple. I'm thinking of a particular client where we see some silos and some challenges around sales and operations, right?
Mhm.
Both super, I'd say individualistic as their own teams, right? Operations, this is how we have to do it. Sales is, well, you're not communicating, and ultimately neither are you going to be doing anything unless both of you are working really well together. So if we're in a situation right now where we've got two silos happening and both very focused on their own agendas, what would you recommend, Rebecca, as some steps to have them starting to perhaps collaborate more?
Well, so much of human behavior in organizations in particular is incentive driven, as we've talked about. And often I'll find, not always, usually we also know we have a visibility bias in organizations such that visibility is associated with value. And so surprisingly, if you're located in different offices, you're going to be less likely to collaborate, not just face to face, but it through virtual channels. That's not surprising. The surprising part is even when you start to be on different floors of the same office, and this is, we're hearing this narrative, return to office because we need more collaboration.
Mhm.
Well, as soon as you're on different floors in an office, your collaboration likelihood drops, nosedives to similar levels than if you were, in completely different offices. And so if they're not communicating and collaborating at all, then yes, silos are going to form at a disproportionately high rate than if they're co-located on the same floor and they can physically see each other. So sometimes that's, it's visibility bias driven. Often, and I would argue more often the case, it's because incentives are misaligned. You have an operations team who is, measured, assessed, rewarded, and has built their processes and norms around certain metrics that are completely different and sometimes even totally misaligned with
Mhm.
the sales organization or the marketing organization. And so, again, understanding, diagnosing the problem. Why is it that these silos exist? Employees can tell you a lot. They know a lot in terms of, why these silos might have existed. Sometimes it's power dynamics. If you have one toxic leader, that can have drastic negative impacts on the overall collaboration between the departments. I see it all the time. If you have a CMO and a chief revenue officer that don't see eye to eye, that then impacts the entire, functions and how they collaborate.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in the emotional intelligence piece because it doesn't matter if we have all the systems in place if we also have humans who are not um, engaging in toxic behaviors and not wanting to hear or listen and understand different points of view, perhaps not having empathy, things like this. There's another factor at play here that we need to do some diagnostics around and perhaps have some accountability. So I'm thinking of, as we're closing off, I'm thinking of an individual that they're looking at their calendar and just noticing. I talk a lot about that you should own your calendar or you should own your email. It shouldn't own you. And then they
Mm-hmm.
realize, oh, I don't own it. It owns me. And I'm like, that's great. It's good. First step is recognizing change needs to happen. So somebody might be listening right now and saying, okay, I want to take some accountability. I want to be empowered on my ends around what I can do to take my calendar back so that I am not in these constant meetings. Or like you said, some people, there is a status, a badge of honor that goes around the busyness. And they're
Mm-hmm.
realizing, I don't want to have that status symbol anymore. I actually want to be effective. And because I talk about how important your calendar needs to also reflect white space for strategy
Mm-hmm.
time and thinking about things. So I know it's a big question, Rebecca, but what would you say? What would you recommend to people who are wanting to take back their calendar?
So this one in particular is complex. In particular, well, first I'll say everyone is a designer of better meetings, better collaboration. We all not only have the power to improve how we collaborate, but also the responsibility. And so within every organization, regardless if you're, in the organization for 1 week or 10 years, we all have ways that we can develop healthier collaboration systems. Now, the key variable here is psychological safety, right? As an individual, how psychologically safe do you feel to push back on broken communication systems? And that's so much a reflection, more a reflection of the culture than anything else. Yes, the more senior you are in the organization, males, engineers, all of these people within the organization that have more status typically have higher levels of psychological safety within their teams. But that's the key variable. And so if you are in a psychologically safe environment, you have a supportive manager, you should be proactively and reactively pushing back on things that are broken. Push back on the meeting that shouldn't be on your calendar and is taking away from work. People will appreciate that. If you come at it from an evidence-based perspective, if you have data, even better, and explain why this isn't the best mode of communication or collaboration and why it's coming at the cost of deep thinking and collaboration and teamwork. Sometimes, employees won't feel that level of confidence to explicitly call out bad meetings. And so certainly there are things at the individual level that still can be done. I often recommend, and this comes from Amy Edmondson, who has done all the great work on psych safety,
Yeah.
leading with curiosity as opposed to an assertion. So, hey, I noticed that this 30-minute meeting, often 15 minutes are spent on status updates, and we don't often get to the real meat of the discussion. What if we moved those status updates to be asynchronously? What if we tried that? What might happen? And so you're not accusing the person of running a bad meeting, you're leaning in with curiosity. That can be effective. Increasingly technology as well, so building in ways that you can deflect the blame that you might experience to technology. One of my favorite ways to do this is on your calendar, block off that you have no meeting blocks if you want, set yourself to out of office so that it auto declines when anyone tries to schedule
Nice,
over.
nice.
Use technology to deflect the blame, or, and probably in addition, have clear rules in terms of what's a non-negotiable. I'm never going to have a week where I have more than 12 hours of meetings, or as a rule, I don't have more than 3 meetings related to one topic. Setting rules for yourself, and then you're able to point to, people always will take it seriously and personally when you cancel a meeting. It's such a human to human interaction. We're establishing a social contract in so many ways where if you decline the meeting, it often feels like you're declining the person behind the meeting. And so the more we can say, no, this isn't about you as an individual. These are the norms that I've established that work well for me and what I know will maximize my and our team's performance. This is why I'm pushing back, or this is why I'm not going to attend the meeting. The most important thing a manager can do in so many ways is give employees explicit permission to leave a meeting if they're not contributing or getting value. Having that conversation, very few managers will have that conversation with their direct reports. Sometimes just that permission, that explicit permission, is enough for employees to feel that confidence in pushing back.
Those are all really, really concrete, actionable tips you've given. So I really appreciate that, Rebecca. I think it's going to be really helpful for people that can see different things they could play with. And I love I'm a big fan of boundaries. So I like we're there ahead of time thinking about some of those boundaries and being able to block that off in the calendar as well. I think all of those tips were awesome. And I think looking at Amy Abenson's work and understanding more about psychological safety, I'm going to give a shout out to Amy again. I've brought her up more on the podcast before too, because I think psychological safety is critical for all organizations. So thanks for bringing that up. This has been such a great discussion, and I hope everyone will check out the book. I'm going to have that in the show notes. But where can people learn more about you, Rebecca?
Sure. So the book is everywhere at your favorite bookstores. My website's RebeccaHinds.com, and I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, so we'll make sure that we have all of those show notes as well. And again, thank you so much for being here today, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me. This has been such a great conversation, and I truly believe, it's the human piece that's where we fall short in so many instances. And I'm glad it's core to your work as well.
Yes, it resonates deeply. And for everybody listening, and I just want to remind you, if you enjoyed the episode, I'd love it if you could share it with others. And thank you for your reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. They truly help the podcast reach more leaders. And if you're looking to develop more confident, emotionally intelligent leaders in your organization, or if you're personally ready to grow as a leader, let's connect. I'd love to share more about my one-on-one coaching, transformational keynotes, and ongoing leadership training. Wherever you are listening in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're sending tons of love. Bye bye.